But this is a Seneca Teach Meet. We do this every Wednesday at 3 p.m. We may move this to the evening depending on what it's decided in terms of schools going back to normal. But in the meantime, we're doing this every Wednesday at 3 p.m. So today we have Sam Strickland, who is the principal of an all-through school that is considered one of the top 30 most improved schools in the country. And he's also the author of Education Exposed. He'll be talking to us about leadership, which is a very interesting topic. It's a different one. We haven't talked too much about that on our Teach Meets yet. So it's going to be a good one. I also want to remind you that Sam has a free CPD course based on his book on Seneca. So if you just go on senecalearning.com, you'll be able to access it and learn even more from Sam than you will on this Teach Meet. Okay, so just to remind you, the website is senecalearning.com, and you can find Sam's course and also lots of other people's, very good people, free CPD, quality CPD for you to do there. If this is your first Teach Meet with us, I just want to explain how things work. I'm going to let Sam speak for like 25, 30 minutes. And then after that, there will be a questions and answers part. But because he cannot see the chat while he is speaking, and giving his presentation, I'm going to ask him the questions. So what I ask you to do is to already type your questions on the chat, even during the presentation, all right? And then I'll read those questions to Sam in the end, okay? So you don't have to wait until the end. If he talks about something that you have a comment about it, you have a question, you want him to talk more about that, or you want to give an example of your school, just go for it and type on the chat, all right? And then I'll ask him those questions in the end. Is that all right? Does anybody have any questions? Now is the time to ask the questions. No? No questions coming up? I'm gonna guess everybody is understood. All right, brilliant. So again, just making sure you tweet Sam and Seneca at Seneca Learn, and then we'll get back to you with the answers to your questions. All right. I just posted Sam's Twitter handle again on the chat. All right, so Sam, can you start, please, whenever you're ready?
Okay, thank you very much for having me, and thank you to everybody that's participating this afternoon. Really do appreciate you giving up potentially an hour of your time to kind of hear me babble in many regards about leadership. This whole unit is entitled "Is Leadership Really a Race?" And a little bit like my book, I'm going to chunk this talk so that we start with kind of common misconceptions. Going to think as we kind of go through this about key questions for you to take away and to consider, but also some advice and some guidance which hopefully is of use, and then kind of bring it to a close with just some key takeaways, which is very much how I've pieced my book together in terms of the chapters. So kind of a starting point is a quote for you, and I'm by and large, I am going to talk to the slides kind of as we go. And this is a quote by Warren Bennis. So I'm not going to insult your intelligence by reading the slide to you, but kind of the starting point here for me with leadership is that you've really got to know yourself first. You've got to know yourself as an individual. You've got to know yourself in terms of your strengths, in terms of your weaknesses, in terms of things that will trigger emotions in you, whether they're good, bad, or indifferent emotions, and then how you portray yourself towards other people. And I would argue you're probably unable to lead effectively if you don't have that level of understanding about yourself. And for some people, that will come very naturally, very quickly. And for others, that will take time to develop and to build on. But that's really the starting point with leadership, is understanding you, understanding yourself. And if anyone in the audience has done, say, NPQSL or NPQH, there are whole sections around kind of understanding yourself that are kind of the makeup of at least a full unit within those courses. But thinking about kind of misconceptions about leadership and school improvement as well, and this whole idea of it being a race, about 15-ish years ago, there was a lot of talk about the kind of 12 to 18-month rat race, whereby you could go at high speed, change a school, turn its culture around, and bring in what were called superheads. And the reality was, during that kind of era of superheads, if someone would come in for a 2 to 3 year hit max, change the school, revamp it, disappear, and then the school would topple. And something I think we need to be really mindful of as leaders is that long-term sustainability. That yes, we want to have actions that have a positive impact. Of course we do. Why are we doing it? But actually there needs to be kind of a longevity to what we're actually trying to achieve. And kind of one of my mantras, which my senior team share, is that slow change is lasting change, which will be a recurring theme as I kind of go through this whole talk. Another misconception is this idea of changing your leadership style on a regular basis, that you're trying to adapt yourself constantly to situations with different leadership hats. And I'll come back to that in a little bit. And the idea of trying to operate as an island, operating on your own and not actually bringing anyone with you, that simply you're the leader, you know best, so what I say goes. Another misconception, and I've seen this with people, dare I say it, that I've worked for or worked alongside, is this whole idea of being busy. That because I am busy and I work hard, it means that I'm really effective. I'm really good at my job, and that's sometimes the case, but sometimes not the case. But also that busyness has unintended consequences, sometimes intended consequences on other people, and it's thinking kind of really carefully with a critical lens about just how busy you are, what impact that does have on other people. And then this whole idea of constantly changing everything. I've worked in schools where kind of every 6 weeks we have to change, because we need to be seen to be doing something, was very much kind of the mindset. And there's a real kind of, I guess, false proxy to that in terms of seeing that as an effective mode for driving a school forwards. In many regards, and I'll talk about this in more detail, you might only actually need 1 or 2 key drivers for an academic year to really bring about highly effective, highly polished change within a school, as opposed to doing it every 2 seconds. Then we've got our seductive things, our quick wins, and our silver bullets and fads. If I buy this off-the-shelf package for £300 and put every pupil through it, progress rate will go through the roof. And in the here and now, sometimes that sounds amazing, but actually, again, in terms of that long-term sustainability and long-term change, that can actually sometimes undermine what you're trying to achieve. Sometimes we try and create work for the sake of creating work. Busy spreadsheets, flight paths, tracking documents. And again, it's thinking, why are we doing that? What is the purpose behind it? I know that people have spoken about pointless meetings before, but we always hold a meeting on a Tuesday afternoon from 3:30 to 4:30, hypothetically. But if you've got nothing to talk about, why hold it at all? Is there a need? In terms of opportunity cost, would that time be better invested giving it back to staff, allowing staff to leave early, dare I say it, and go home and be with their families or do whatever it is they do outside of work? And that kind of ties in with the idea of working long hours is a key to being really effective in our profession. And I could think back to numerous times where I've been told that, you need to be in at 7 a.m. and you need to not leave till 6:30 in the evening. And that's great for the person that's saying it, because that might be how they work. But actually, you've got to be mindful that not everybody works in that manner, and that everybody has got different commitments outside of work. And some people actually prefer to work late at night. Some people are incredibly efficient and effective at their job without working long hours. And I think as long as you're doing the core function of your job, it's kind of remembering that. And then the final misconception is this, or mistake, is this idea of endlessly emailing people. I have a huge issue with emails, which, dare I say it, Tom Rogers, I'm going to name call him on purpose, because he always name calls me at Research Ed events and other talks that we go to. And he kind of ribbed me for this. But I do have a bugbear with emails, because I think I appreciate the current context and climate, we kind of need them. But as a normal mode of communication, when they start to span more than 6 or 7 lines long, really that warrants a meeting. And endless emails being sent out at 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night on a Saturday night is not an effective way of leading people. But I've fallen foul of being in that boat before in my career. So thinking then about the type of leader, and Tom Rees talks about this, who heads up Ambition, and he blogs about this as well, and I'm absolutely with him. So many job adverts talk about kind of superhero style qualities that senior leaders should have if they're going to be highly effective at their job. And I think you look at the list of traits that I've put there, and that's just a few of the kind of traits that are sometimes referenced in job adverts and job specs and job descriptions. I question how many of those we've all actually got, or collectively, all of us listening to this talk at the moment, put together. Can we all say that we're superheroes with Herculean drive, incredibly charismatic and visionary and driven and dynamic, etc., all of the time? It's not possible. And, you know, for any one of us, we have a naff day. We have a day where we don't want to get out of bed. You know, even as a head teacher, I have the odd day where, you know, I still go in and do my job, of course, but, you know, internally, I'm so tired. The last thing I'm feeling is like a superhero. I'm feeling quite the polar opposite of that. So it's thinking, I think, more about, well, are you measured? Are you genuinely, not disingenuously, humble? Do you have emotional intelligence? Are you interpersonal? Are you a team player? Are you able to build a team? Are you able to bring other people with you? And one of the very first things I was kind of told as an assistant head when I became an assistant head for the first time by the deputy that was mentoring me was that leadership is no longer about you. It is about everybody else. And at the time, I thought that person was bonkers, and walked away kind of scratching my head thinking, well, what are you talking about? And I would say about 6 weeks later, it really sunk in properly, because it's kind of, you know, exponential learning where you learn on the job, where it really sunk in. And I thought, you know, that deputy is absolutely right. And then the other side is, are you kind of like that, you know, a solo, the person who's going to just try and do everything themselves? And that, if you're a true leader, isn't leadership. That whole idea of driving everything on your own. You've got to be part of a team and work as a team. And then it brings me to one of those common misconceptions of changing your leadership style kind of every 2 seconds. And John Dunford, there's a quote here, which is often cited through MPQs, about adapting a style to suit the situation. And I can kind of understand why that's been written and why that's been said. And, you know, there's a number of different hats here. These aren't all the hats under the sun in terms of leadership style that you can adopt. But I'd actually say that is a misconception that we need to be really mindful of. Having to try and change our leadership style can actually be quite an unnatural thing to do. And it's what I call the chameleon effect. This idea of adapting yourself to different audiences and to different situations and to different contexts. It can mean that you're not actually being true to yourself and the way in which that you would actually lead. And those kind of changes to your demeanor and tone and manner can actually be quite disconcerting for other people, and can actually kind of derail other people that work around you, because there's the potential that they never really quite know where they stand. And I think we're far better to be, again, measured but true to ourselves, and to bring people with us. I mean, the other thing that we should be wary of is being emotive. You know, if I'm in a bad mood because of something that's happened in my own life, I shouldn't really be bringing that into my workplace. And it's easier said than done, of course, it's for all of us, but it's reminding ourselves that we are actually professional and professionals. And the kind of the heartbeat of a school and the culture of a school is absolutely set by a head. So if I go into a briefing for sake of argument and I'm in a foul mood and I make it obvious I'm in a foul mood, that will transcend across my entire school that day and potentially that entire week till the next briefing. If I walk around, even if I'm not feeling it inside, kind of chipper, smiley, happy, that resonates across my establishment. Not to say to do it falsely, but again, you've got to be quite, you know, you've got to think about that as an approach, I would argue. So this whole idea of knowing yourself, and I said I would pose questions that you kind of need to go away and think for yourselves, because I can't give you the answers to these because we're all different. But it's thinking about, what do you believe in? What do you stand for? Who are you? What is it that actually drives you? What is it that motivates you? What are your values? What is your moral purpose? What are your strengths? And the hardest one for us all, I think, to admit are, what are our limitations? Because that's a really hard thing to verbally articulate. I think we're probably all quite humble in many regards about our strengths, but it's also being honest about those as well. How do we deal with challenge? I mean, crikey, the current situation is as big a challenge as anybody could face in terms of leadership. But in just a normal school day, you're always kind of half a second, dare I say, away from a disaster. And there's a model called sinking, surfing and swimming. And I'd say for any leader, you can go through those 3 phases within about 30 seconds in any one day, where at 1 minute you're on cloud 9 thinking everything's amazing, and then someone just comes and sees you and says, this has just happened, this safeguarding issue's kicked off, and you go crashing back down really, really quickly. So it's thinking about those different kind of questions there, I think, are really important as a leader. And ultimately, are you comfortable in your own skin? That's really, really important. And I talk about this in my book, Education Exposed, but what's your ideal self? Do you have the realization to know who you are now? Do you know where you want to be as a leader? Because we're always evolving and developing. None of us, myself included, are the finished product, the finished article. What are our strengths? But then what do we need to do to work on to become an even better leader? If I put this in a crude sense, as a footballer, I'm really strong with my right foot, I'm really weak with my left. I'm never going to be the ultimate footballer unless I practice on my left foot and develop that. And leadership is the same. What are the things that are holding me back from being kind of the leader I want to be, and how do I work on them? I think the boy axis models is really useful. I do think, though, you should be your own person. I think you should allow your personality, as long as it's professional within the working context, to come through. I think it's important that leaders plan and have plans with clear timeframes, and articulate those really clearly to everybody else. I think we should also have what our house in dream looks like. What's your ideal? And I think before I joined the current school I'm in now, I had the benefit of about 6 months of preparation time, where I drew up and drafted, and I've got it in a notebook to be fair, what would I like all of my departments to look like in an ideal world? If I was head of PE, history, geography, whatever, what's my ideal? How would I like safeguarding in an ideal to look like? Behaviour, whatever it is. But what is your house in dream? Because one thing that certainly will happen as a leader is people will ask you questions and people will expect an answer from you. I think it's all right, though, to say that you don't know or that you need a bit of time to think about things. What also, though, is your moral purpose, and how central is that to all of the decisions that you make? And probably the other key thing I think here is to not allow negativity to consume you, because that's what leads, I would argue, to mental paralysis. The more you think about how bad something is, or a decision you've made that's wrong, that hasn't quite worked in the way that you thought it would, if you allow that to negatively consume you, you will struggle as a leader. And then you'll be more inclined to go down that quick win, fad driven route, try and get quick wins back to kind of build yourself back up on an even keel. And that could be really dangerous. And this is probably another key thing I would argue, this idea of judgment. In terms of becoming a senior leader, and certainly becoming a deputy head or a head, dare I say, even a head of department, to be fair, you're putting your head above the parapet, and people will make views on you and will make judgments about you. And again, back to that idea of being comfortable in your own skin. I know that, someone somewhere on a Friday night probably will have discussed a decision I made in the week and doesn't agree with it. And I've just got to kind of reconcile that internally as a leader. And I think we all do as leaders within schools. So it's being able to accept that people are going to form opinions on you, whether that's staff, pupils, parents, governors, whoever. So kind of this whole notion then of what is leading, and why I think we should take our time with leading in general, and the changes that we bring. Leading is about leading other people. It's not about just yourself. And I appreciate I've kind of repeated myself, and that's something I very deliberately do in my own leadership practice, is to repeat points I've made. That's not because I'm bumbling and aloof. It's about trying to get key messages kind of drilled home. But I do think it's about emotional intelligence as well. That, colleague X who hasn't adhered to a deadline you've set, the easy thing to do is to fly off the handle and to think to yourself, well, they're just a lazy toe rag. But actually, why is that? What's caused that? Have you, as the leader, imposed a deadline that's unrealistic? Is there a lot going on in their own life? It's having that proper level of understanding, being able to pick up on why a colleague might be upset. And I think something we should never stray from is being human as well. And equally, and I know I've not put this on the slide, but it's also admitting to where you've got things wrong. I was told that admitting mistakes was a weakness years ago. And I think it's one of the worst pieces of advice I've ever been given by anybody about leadership. because we're not infallible and we all make mistakes within our professional life. And I think it's fair to put it on the table and say, I got this wrong, and this is what I'm going to do to rectify it and move it forwards. Equally, for the people that you work with, and again, understanding them, I think it's really important not to chastise people when they make a mistake. I think it's far better and far more effective. And again, this is where things take time to kind of coach somebody through and discuss a mistake that might have been made, but what are the learning points and how do you move forwards from that? So for me, leadership in terms of enabling others, I would say these are and I talk about this again in my book, but these are some of the key drivers to really change a school. And this takes time, culture and behavior. I think if you engage in a series of what I would call behavioral quick wins, you can flip behavior around within about 72 hours, but then to really embed a culture can take you at least 24 months to really get the semblance of the culture that you want, and then probably 5, 6, 7 years to really drive it. The curriculum's the same. Christine Council talks about the curriculum being a lifetime of work. And I could have a Rolls Royce all singing, all dancing curriculum on paper within the next kind of 2 to 3 years, but actually the deep embedment of that could take at least a decade, and then another decade to refine it. Leading is also about how you lead on teaching, which is, if you're going to think about everything within a school, what do you actually need to have happen? You need the pupils to behave, the culture to be strong, a really, really great curriculum, which is enacted really effectively. And then everything else kind of around it in terms of data trackers, flight paths, whatever, is kind of white noise. With that though, staffing is hugely important. How do you treat your staff? How do you build them? How do you develop them? And then keeping at the forefront in terms of leading your vision all the way and never really deviating from that vision. And this is a mantra I've talked about before at Research Heads conferences that I've delivered at, but you permit what you promote and you promote what you permit. That starts from the top and it permeates its way kind of all the way down within the context of a school. Some other kind of do's, I think it's important that you sleep on decisions. You might be thrown a curveball in a meeting, whether it's a staff meeting, a senior team meeting, a departmental meeting, and you might feel, and the natural inclination is to give an answer there and then. And I think there's nothing wrong in saying, I'm going to come back to you in a couple of days once I've really had time to think about that. And some other do's is accept mistakes. We all make mistakes, which I appreciate I've already referenced. But trying not to allow that to become an internal mental war, which completely unpicks you and then destroys you in terms of your own confidence. I think it's also important to accept that you can be wrong. It would be incredibly arrogant of me as the head to say, I'm never wrong. I'm sure there are decisions I've made since I've been in post for over the last 3 years that haven't been quite right. And then the other aspect as a do for leaders of any level is to watch out for what I call the Dunning-Kruger all-stars, the know-it-alls, the people who think they know absolutely everything, who will cite that they are more well-read than a little, and always have a voice and a view and give you, feedback on what you should be doing, but actually there's no real substance to what they're saying. They're seductive people who will try and throw quick wins at you and fads at you, and you need to be really suspicious of those people, in my opinion. So kind of a running theme here is this idea of taking your time, but I would actually argue that rushing decisions is a huge Achilles heel for us all. And something to kind of have in your mind is, let's just say you've spent the last 8 weeks thinking about a decision and you try and roll it out within 30 seconds, kind of hypothetically. You've given nobody else any thinking time at all. You've had all the thinking time under the sun to think that your idea is amazing, will work, you've thought it through. And then and I've worked in schools where this happens, Friday afternoon, the staff call together, Monday morning, this is happening. It gives nobody any time to unpick, unfold, question, challenge, and I think challenge is good, why that decision's been made, and that can be a real weakness. So I think outwardly, it's actually saying that taking your time over things is actually a strength, not a sign of weakness at all. And sometimes actually sitting intelligently can be your biggest weapon, your strongest weapon. And it's always bearing in mind you've got to bring people with you. And again, I'd go to, this is a Christine Councilism in terms of analogy, but the idea of building a school is like building a cathedral. It takes a lifetime and it takes more than one person to do so. And then the other bit is to never really deviate from your plan. And this goes back to one of the points I made earlier. You really should, as a leader, have a plan for what you're trying to drive, whether it's within the satellite that you're within. And I talk a lot about the mothership and satellites, or the mothership, the school itself. Is it on your school improvement plan? If it isn't, why are you doing it? Because you're just deviating from what your actual plan is all about. What is it you actually want people to do? I think we really need to think about that. And I think we should never, ever lose sight of what it is to be a full-time class-based teacher. And I kind of use a water bottle analogy, where if you take the lid off a bottle of water, it's pretty much brimming to the top. There's a tiny little gap, kind of like 2% left at the top before a water bottle overspills. And when you start pouring stuff in, ideas, initiatives, things that you want to drive your school, it's just going to overflow. So either you need to get rid of some of that water to allow other things to go in, or you need to be really specific about what it is that you want, but also to stick to it. The seductive thing, again, is to sort of run an idea, see it go for maybe 2 weeks. Everybody goes, oh, it's not working, because you've not actually given it the time. To actually embed and to kind of settle into your school environment, and balking at the first bit of pushback, whether it's from pupils or parents or indeed staff. Sometimes you have to really hold your nerve with the focus that you're trying to drive. But I think if you've articulated what you're trying to do with good time, with good reason, with evidence and research, and you've shown what the benefits will be, that tends to help, not always, but more of the time, in terms of bringing people with you. And I think in terms of your overall kind of school improvement plan as a whole, I would personally only have one big theme for a year. I mean, our plan this year is called Doing the Same But Better, and 3 foci that underpin it as a maximum. And our drivers this year are to maximise outcomes, to embed our curriculum, and to embed our culture. And they're really clear and really easy to understand, with really specific targets that kind of work within those. Equally, when you're trying to drive a change within your school, I think it's thinking about who are going to be your early adopters. And I think there's sort of 2 examples of 2 things that I try to drive where I am. One is knowledge organisers, which I think we've got really quite effectively done now. Initially, it was to get on board middle leaders with me who were very up for using them, letting them test them to see if they worked in our context, because if they didn't, there was no point in trying to launch it whole school, and then get feedback from those middle leaders and not be precious about it. This is my baby, this is what I want to drive in the school. And then they come back and they say, well, it doesn't work. Then I'd have to have been broad-shouldered enough to kind of accept that. But I think it's important that as a leader, you identify who's going to come with you first and foremost, to help drive whatever it is you're trying to drive across your school. And then some kind of do's to kind of start to bring this to a close. I think it's really important we give people time. And that, going back to that idea of telling people on a Friday night for Monday morning, we need to stop doing that as a profession. We need to give people lots of time. I deliberately kind of give the main feelers of my school improvement plan to my staff on my January inset training day, and then give the full detail of the plan at Easter, and openly say to staff, if you want to come talk to me about it, do, because I think that level of discourse before September is so important. I think it's really important to communicate and over communicate what you're trying to do, and that needs to be in person. I'll go back to that point about emails. Emails can be really interpreted and misinterpreted completely in the wrong way, and they don't allow, I would argue, for the level of thinking that perhaps needs to go into an idea in the way that they should. Emails are fine for short, sharp, snappy, but I think actually face to face, dare I say it, and I appreciate that's hard in the current climate, Zoom to Zoom, is probably more of an effective approach. I also think we need to make things low stakes, that the minute we start throwing accountability at everybody, if you don't hit this target, that target, etc., that's when we start to lose people. And if you think about the model of flow, flow talks about an autotelic experience. In other words, people really enjoy what they're doing when it's kind of completely low stakes, and you allow them to kind of freely explore, and you take away all the benchmark of parameters and high stakes away. So if I was saying I want you to design an amazing history curriculum, now that's my subject, specialism and bias, I probably wouldn't want to have a load of arbitrary targets put around that, because I'm not going to give that the level of intellectual thought that I might otherwise. So I think giving staff the time to engage in flow in many regards leads things to change, actually, dare I say, even a more rapid pace, but they tend to buy into it more than we need to do this because we need to get 0.2, we need to get an outstanding Ofsted, or whatever it might be. And I think this is important as well. We should never lose sight of the Housing dream. If I was to ask everybody here, why did you become a teacher? And I've done this multiple times when I've delivered talks on behaviour. The answers tend to be broadly the same. It's around loving a subject, wanting to educate pupils, wanting to make a difference. And where the magic happens is in the classroom with kids. It's not on, bits of paper sat on shelves. It's with children in classrooms. So the whole idea of core knowledge, the hinterland that it hangs on, our disciplinary knowledge, pushing pupils to the top, the curriculum serving as a progression model. Well, let's get rid of everything else that gets in the way of that, because that's what's going to make the biggest change to our kids. And then kind of the final bit is then how you bring a team together. And it's this idea of jigsaw management. Again, a seductive thing to do is, I don't know, let's just say for sake of argument, I am a really bolshy, dogmatic leader. I want carbon copy clones of me who are going to all be the same. That doesn't lead to a very fruitful senior team. Or I want a senior team of yes people. Well, you could fall really quickly flat on your face if everybody's just like, yes. You need challenge. So you need at least 1 or 2 people in your team who are going to go, I'm not sure that's going to work. Is that really going to work? And allowing that level of challenge to be there, and to have an array of different people that make up your team. Easier said than done, I appreciate, but this is your ideal world. So kind of in short then, really, to bring this to a close, because I think I've probably gone over time, I think we need to keep our priorities simple, really well understood, really well communicated. I think we should take our time over everything, in all honesty, and give people time to really think about what they're trying to do. But the most important thing for our classroom-based teachers is just allowing them to teach. And if what you're trying to do gets in the way of that, that you're going to consume hundreds of hours because you want a spreadsheet filling in, well, that's hundreds of hours they're not going to be put into their planning, their classroom delivery, having a life so they can come in tomorrow refreshed and recharged. And the final bit, I think, is just to stay true to yourself in terms of you as a person, but understanding your strengths and your areas for improvement. And I hope that was useful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sam. That was brilliant. That was great. And there are so many questions. You have no idea. So maybe we can, you can stop sharing a screen so you get bigger and everybody can see you answering the questions.
Yeah, no problem.
That was amazing. People are already thanking you a lot. I loved it. I thought it was very useful, even to me, who I'm not really a teacher at the moment. I thought it was great. Okay, so there are a lot of questions. I tried to organize them through themes, but there were a few about home learning, or kind of about the current situation that we live in.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to ask the 3 questions and then you can answer them together or individually.
Okay.
So one, how have you dealt with home learning, or this working from home? To what extent do you think that working from home is going to change our approach to flexible working when we go back to school?
Yeah.
And do you think perceptions of what makes leadership effective will evolve as a result of this pandemic and people working from home and having to show different traits of what common leadership would be?
I mean, if I take the first one then, in terms of how we've dealt with home learning, because that's really, it's a massive challenge for us all, and it's something that's taken us all out of our comfort zone. I would argue, unless you're a data geek, dare I say, and I don't mean that horribly. Some people love, an IT geek. Some people absolutely love all the technology under the sun, which is great. In terms of how we've gone about it, in terms of the work that we've set our pupils, we've done that through in many regards, through knowledge organisers, which we've really developed as a school, through workbooks, because we have a workbook approach as a school. And we've had very little in the way of what you would describe as live online learning. I deliberately have gone down that route with my establishment to protect my staff, if I'm honest. don't want to sound contentious, you can understand perhaps some of the arguments from certain quarters out there at the moment, and certain political figures saying live online learning is is the bee's knees. I'd like to see the evidence that shows that to be the case. I don't think there is any evidence to show that that's the case. I think we've also got to be mindful that our staffing bodies are really complex entities in their own right. And for every teacher that I might have that's 23 single and could do online live learning, to the cows come home, I've got a member of staff that can't do that as well. So I wanted to set up an approach that's sustainable, and also terms around what we can offer to our pupils kind of moving forwards. And it looks like obviously that this current state of play is going to stay in some way, shape or form. What we've talked about really is the idea that staff need to get out of their heads, and this isn't meant critically, I'd be exactly the same. I don't own my year 10 class. That is the school's class, and the accountability for the results, do you know what that sits with me as the head, doesn't sit with my teachers moving forwards. And departments kind of need to, I would argue, need to think as teams, and perhaps, let's just say for sake of argument, your science department have got 10 colleagues. 2 of them might do the face-to-face delivery in school with year 10, while the other 8 divide up between them a year group each, and 2 colleagues work on year 7, 2 on year 8, 2 on year 9, 2 on year 12, for sake of argument. And what we're going to try and move to is the idea that they're going to pre-record for any one given sort of school week 5 30-minute pre-recorded lessons that then just get sent out to our pupils to work from. And if you think about planning and recording those, you're probably looking at a day's worth of work being realistic. That gives those teachers then another 4 days to do other things, and some of that might be dealing with childcare, dare I say it, or whatever else they've got to do in their own life, and some of that might be that they want to do some marking or some other planning, for sake of argument. The second question was around flexible working, wasn't it, if I recall? Sorry.
If you think leadership style is going to change because of what we've been going through?
I'd like to think in the establishments where leadership is really open, that continues. And I'd like to think, idealistically, probably naively, where it isn't so open, that it becomes more open. Because I think if nothing else, this current kind of context has said that we really need to be open and transparent, and completely honest with our staff about what it is we're trying to do. And equally, to be probably as emotionally intelligent as we can be. I know that varies from school to school, and I know of examples of where senior leaders have been asked to count every single email that's been sent to pupils to create trackers of them. And I don't think that's a particularly healthy way of dealing with things. I'd like to think moving forwards, idealistically, it will open up a more honest dialogue and narrative between leaders and staff. Will it? I don't know, in all honesty. It's hard to change our stripes and our spots, isn't it, in many regards?
Something that's been going on forever.
Yeah, indeed. And then, sorry, the third question, apologies.
That was it. You kind of answered them already together on the first one. There were some questions that I think are very interesting from a leadership point of view. If you see a school improving a lot like yours did, how do you know what caused that improvement?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's a really fair question. I can't pinpoint it on any one thing. And I'm not able to say, do you know what, if you sit pupils in rows, there's your magic bullet, this is what will do it. I would argue it is a collective effort. It's not just because I turned up as the principal. I would have fallen flat on my face if all the staff had said, no thanks, we're not interested in what you're saying, Sam, and we're not going to do that here. That would have been a real kind of fight and challenge. So I guess I was fortunate that I had a staff hungry for somebody to drive the school in a different direction when I joined. But I think it's the collective of an array of different things that have come together to allow that change in results to occur. But it's not just about the results. I could have, if I'm going to be really honest, I could have played games in the first year in post and got my results up. But that, I could have thrown every kid into every bucket 3 winner from the off of joining, and really massaged our data. And outwardly, that would look amazing. Inwardly, though, you would have seen a culture and a climate of just utter madness. because that's what it was when I joined. And it's not the case now. You know, the school is uber calm. You can hear a pin drop when lessons are in situ during
Yeah.
during the school day. And we've had almost 1,000 people visit the school, and unless they've shortchanged me with their praise, and I don't think they have, to be fair, people have walked away kind of bowled over. And I think for me, it goes back to what I talked about in my talk. It's about that long-term sustainability, which for me is far more important. And you will get people buying into that because they can see differences that make their lives better. Teachers at the end of the day want to be able to teach.
Yeah.
So in generating a culture that allows that to happen, you're going to get people buying into you. And ultimately the lag effect is that the results come, and it's the hardest bit is sitting tight for that to happen.
Yep. So now some more, like, I guess, personal questions people wanted to know, not about you, about them. How do you make your head teacher aware that you are interested in progression without sounding annoying or awkward?
Yeah, I think back to my own career. I requested meetings with my heads during kind of my junior years, so to speak, to talk, perhaps careful how you kind of couch it, but to talk about my career progression and just where could my career go. I remember as an NQT, I got on really well with the heads because he was in the history department with me, to be fair. And I asked him, what's the pathway to being a head teacher? And he gave me all the time under the sun to talk it through about what pathway you'd need to take to become a head. And it's very different kind of then, sort of 20-ish years ago, perhaps to how it is now, because I think the profession has changed fundamentally. But I think ultimately, if you're wanting to talk about your career progression, your professional development, I think an open, honest conversation with the heads, is more than fine. And actually, I think all heads have got a duty to professionally develop their staff.
Yeah. So since you're talking about that as a head to other heads, how do you recommend them to improve their staff professional development? What kind of things they can do to help their teachers develop even more?
Yeah, I mean, you've got to be obviously very careful, haven't you, in terms of how you couch things to other heads, because you don't want to come across as being like the know-it-all or the arrogant one. And I don't know everything, that I make loads of mistakes. In terms of kind of basic recommendations, I'm going to sound biased, but I would recommend that staffing bodies look at things like Seneca, research eds, going to research ed conferences or conventions when they're back up and running. The EdFest convention at Wellington. So events like that, getting staff to read around their subject. I think as a class teacher, that is one of the most powerful forms of CPD, and giving your staff the time to do that is hugely powerful. I think it's going back to the basics, really, of what is it you're trying to drive in your school. Give your staff the training around that, rather than a kind of cluster bomb and hoping that something sticks.
Yep, sounds good. So there are some questions about applying for leadership jobs. So how would you prepare for the interview? What's the best things to add to your CV? Can you make a shy person more confident for those roles?
Okay, so in terms of applying for like your first assistant headship, say, as a leadership position, you need to, most heads, I'm not saying all, will probably want to see that you've got kind of a track record of success over maybe a 2 or 3 year window. Whether that's right or not, we can debate that to the cows come home. But I think in terms of an effective letter of application, you'd want that in there. You'd want to be able to match yourself against the job description, whatever that job description is. Invariably, and this is where the MPQ courses are actually quite useful, I would argue, you'll be asked about where you've led on an aspect of whole school change, how you've led and managed and nurtured staff, the size of the people that you've led and nurtured, and what it is that you've actually done and the impact from that, but also what you've learned about yourself and mistakes that you might have made. And they're kind of common questions that often come up for any leadership position, to be fair. And often the same is asked around pupils. Can you recall a time of where you've made a massive monumental impact on a pupil? Talk to me about what you did and why and how. And then in terms of your CV, if again, back to that question about what speaking to your heads, if you haven't been on some professional development courses about leadership, I think it's important that you ask the question, can I go on some? I think it'd be remiss not to make a head aware that you are thinking of a leadership position. And this isn't, this isn't binary as well. This isn't the case for every single leadership role. Sometimes you might be looking for a head of maths who's going to become an assistant head strategic lead for maths. They probably don't need a 3-year track record because there simply isn't 1,001 heads of maths out there. So it does vary from one school to the next. But I think being able to demonstrate a sense of impact and having done something whole school, better still would be to say that you've got, fancy phrase here, wider systems leadership, that you've got experience of working with other schools. That's really powerful, especially as you move up and up and up through the ladder.
There is a question that I thought was interesting because it was kind of on the opposite direction. It's basically, if you're a teacher and you want to be the best teacher you can be, you don't want to be a leader. You do not want to be in a leadership position. The question was, is that okay? Is that seen as a negative trait in your school? Should you tell your head teacher that you're not interested in leadership positions?
I don't think it's anything to be shy about. There's nothing wrong. Whatever anybody wants to do with their career, there is no right and there is no wrong, and everybody is different. Some people want to be leaders, assistant heads, whatever, CEOs, etc. And some people just want to stay in the classroom, and there's nothing wrong with that. And, if everybody wanted to be a CEO for sake of argument, we'd have no teachers. So it's certainly not something to be frowned upon. I think in terms of how do you make that person be the best teacher they can be, that's where you've got to be really open and give time, give support, give an opportunity, make everything low stakes so that member of staff can really, going back to that idea of flow, really engage with their subject in its fullest, truest sense. And that for me, in terms of is where subject knowledge is so important, so powerful. And it's giving a member of staff the opportunity to really read around their subject and to work as part of a bigger team if they're in a decent sized department for sake of argument, or even if they're in a small department, but working with others.
Sounds good. So there were a lot of questions pretty much about the same topic. I'm just going to ask one of them. You mentioned that it's good to have some challenge, so people in your team that challenge your decisions, but a lot of people mentioning more than a challenge when other colleagues are cynical or just playing negative about everything. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, and of course that happens. Be really naive and potentially arrogant as well to say no one's ever been cynical about a decision I've made. If you've got someone who's, I suppose there's different layers within that. You've got quiet cynicism where they'll go with it, they'll do it, but internally they're thinking, nah, this isn't for me, and they leave, because they just think, the culture in this school now is this, I'm off because it's not for me. So you get that side, and that's quite easy, I suppose, because a colleague makes that conscious decision of, I'm off, I don't agree with anything you've got to say. Where it's more difficult, more challenging, is where you've got the really vocal person who's trying to rally everybody against you. And I think in that situation, this sounds combative and it's not meant to be. I think it's a professional dialogue. It's not I'm your leader, I'm superior to you, but it's a very much, this is where we're going as a school, or this department, or whatever part of the school that you're in charge of, and either you jump on board and you row in the right direction with me, or actually you might need to think about going, because we're not going to change it. I think it's also important though to hear them out as to why they're really cynical, vocally against what you're trying to do. There may well be some real reason behind it. We've seen this 15 times over the last 4 decades, because it's somebody who's been in the profession a long time. But equally, it's important to listen to what someone's got to say. And of course it is. If you're the leader, you've ultimately got to come to a decision as well. And you've got to be, brave enough and strong enough and have enough of a backbone to go, well, this is what we're doing. And at the end of the day, that's why you're kind of paid that level of money to make decisions.
So just following up from there, there were a few questions about when you take over a new leadership position, and you are younger or less experienced than some of the other teachers that you are now above. How to deal with that, and also somebody don't know if you want to answer that, but somebody specifically asked about being a female leader in a school full of male teachers.
Yeah, okay. So if take the young one first, and that's so
Yeah.
hard, isn't it? Because I've seen it on Twitter a few times actually, where people are, oh, well, I've got 3 decades of experience, and you've been in this profession for 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
You were in nappies while I was teaching. You get those kind of comments, don't you? And I kind of think, sorry to use football here as a daft analogy. I've played football since I was about 4. So for a long time, far longer than I'd like to kind of, publicly declare. But it doesn't mean I'm a good footballer. And it doesn't mean that I'm a better footballer than a 15-year-old in my year 10 who's got a contract for Manchester United. And I think, when you've got staff who are kind of using the age card against you, again, it's back to explaining your rationale, explaining your reasoning, holding strong, trying to find advocates that are going to be on board with you. The hardest bit is not allowing that negativity to consume you and to take it to heart, because that is so difficult. As you know, it's easier said than done. I think to my first assistant headship position in an all-girls school that I worked in years ago, I was the first ever male senior leader in that school, and comparatively, I was young compared to a number of the staff, and I knew I had to, dare I say, I had to prove myself. And that's a hard kind of pill to swallow, that there was a sense of having to earn your stripes. But it's kind of little things that show that you're not arrogant and you're prepared to roll your sleeves up. I'll give one example. I remember there was a water leak in the sixth form centre, which I was in charge of because I was the head of sixth form. And I got the mop and a bucket out and mopped it up myself. Now, you could say, actually, that's the site team's job to do, isn't it? But actually, staff saw me do that. And it just shows that I would roll my sleeves up and muck in. And actually, that bizarrely earned me quite a bit of kudos. And that's a really daft analogy. The other one with men, you get schools, don't you? And there's a gender bias. Either it's heavily female, it's heavily male. And then my view is, certainly in terms of appointments, gender is irrelevant. It's about the right person who's got the right skill set to do the job, and it should be based on merit. And I think I'm really fortunate where I am, that I've got, in terms of my senior team, almost a 50-50 split of males and females. Where it's heavily male based, it's just about being professional. We are all professionals working in a professional working context, and that's really where it begins and ends. And that's where the discourse should always be about the professional, what you're trying to do and what you're trying to drive. And I think if anyone tries to kind of step outside of that using male chauvinist approaches, I think you need to, as long as you've got support, call them out. I think you should call them out anyway, to be fair. And one thing that's really difficult to ignore, especially as a head, is something in writing. I could verbally tell you I've got, I'm being picked on, for sake of argument, by colleague X. That could be swept under a carpet. If it's in black and white in an email, I'll go back to my bit about emails. But if it's there, it's almost impossible to ignore, because there's a trail, there's a trace.
An official complaint. So also talking about taking over a new department, some people are asking, if you take a head of humanities and you're only specialist in history, what's your first priorities? How do you deal with the geography and the RS teachers? Subjects that you don't know that much about.
And you've experienced this as a senior leader when you line manage departments that you line manage French and you can't speak French and you've never studied or taught it. I think it's sitting down with the middle leaders individually, asking them to talk about, I kind of, my stepping stones would be to talk about them professionally. How do they lead the department? What's the department like? What the personality's like? I would talk to each member of the geography department, history department, etc. I think that's really important. It's also to introduce you, what you're about as well. And then I think the next kind of round of conversations, and I appreciate this sounds kind of like laborious because you're talking a lot here in terms of conversations with people, is to get those middle leaders to explain their curriculums to you. And their curriculum approaches, and the thinking that's gone behind their curriculums. That will tell you an awful lot. And you could do it one of two ways. You could either come up with your own questions that you're going to ask, or you could get them to devise questions that they're they want you to ask them, or you could do a mishmash of the two. But I think it's important as a starting point. I think that's where I would begin. I would begin to get to know the people. Then I would move on to talking more importantly about the curriculum and the nitty gritty of how it's delivered and what the departmental routines might be, or are there no departmental routines, and then take it from there.
Yeah, we're almost out of time, but I'm going to ask you a couple more questions if people can still stay, and you can stay a few more minutes. So about parents, what if parents don't like your approach to the school? What do you do?
Yeah, and this is really, really hard. This is going to sound bullshit. I don't go into the parents are feeding to my schools and tell them how to do their job in their workplace, because I'll take one example. My chair of governors is a builder and he's got his own building business. I know nothing about building, and he will freely admit he doesn't know enough about running a school. He knows a lot about education because he's the chair, but he's careful in terms of how he might challenge me in that regard. I'm great. It's a great relationship that we have. But in terms of parents, I think again, it's back to communication. It's back to timing. It's about over communicating what you're trying to do. But equally, you've got to stand your grounds. You are always going to get at least a small number of parents that will disagree with you, even if 98% of parents agree. There's always going to be a few that don't. And in some schools where it needs a lot doing to it, perhaps it's the school culture and you do need to become quite strict for a period of time, you will get parents that will potentially really take you on. And I think you've just got to stand really, really firm. You are in charge. I know it's our school, but you are the head of the school and you've been appointed for a reason. And I think it's really dangerous when we start to balk and cave in on decisions because a parent might not like it, because then you become held to ransom.
That's true. It's just, going back to school after all of this, the question was, are you going to focus more on the mental health of students, or are you going to try to catch up with the curriculum? Do you already have a plan for what you're going to do when we go back to school?
Yeah. I mean, in terms of the mental health aspect, my school's not the only school that would have done this. I think every single school would have done this. We would have had endless welfare checks undertaken across our cohorts, and all schools are making phone calls, emails, whatever. I think we've probably all got a fairly good idea in real time of where there might be issues. I think it's important that we say to pupils when they come back, we're here. And if you need to talk to us, we're here for you, and we will deal with whatever you present really seriously. But I think there's a real danger, and I think this is a bit of a red herring actually kind of moving forwards, that we spend too long labouring and labelling kind of what it was like to be in lockdown and how bad it must have been. And I think there's a real danger that we could end up fueling problems that may not even be there and make things far worse than they are. If I think about most year 10 pupils, for sake of argument, their biggest anxiety is going to be their GCSEs next year. And if we spend weeks and weeks and weeks talking about their feelings, and that's not meant badly, I don't mean it quite as crudely as that, we're not actually going to do the thing that we really need to do with them, which is to educate them and to get them ready for what next summer may present, and who knows what that will present. My view is, in terms of the school I'm in, where it's full steam ahead, we need to get on with delivering the curriculum, but we need to be really clear with the pupils that we're there for them. But we also need to recalibrate, I would argue, our school culture. If you think to any sort of lengthy holiday, all school cultures, when you come back, end up being a little bit flaky to begin with, and some recalibrate themselves really quickly and others take a bit longer. But we will be thinking about, once we've got the pupils back in earnest, the culture and getting into lessons and learning.
Okay, it sounds good. We're now out of time completely. So I just want to thank Sam again. Thank you very much. That was great. I'm sure I speak for everybody that it was really, really insightful. Can you let people know again your Twitter handle, your email, how they can contact you, website?
Yeah, if you go to @StrickoMaster on Twitter, I'm happy to take any questions from there.
Yeah, sounds good. And the name of your book again?
It's Education Exposed.
Yeah, and there is a free course about that on Seneca learning that you can take as an introduction to the book, and then go ahead and buy the book, which I'm sure is going to be even better for you to talk about leadership later. Oh, somebody said I'm cute. Okay, I'll take that. Great. So next week we're going to have another Teach Meet Wednesday. So make sure you sign up for that if you haven't already. And thank you very much, Sam. I hope everybody has a good day today.
Thanks for having me, and thank you to everybody for listening as well.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Bye bye, everybody.